This is the second module of the development and operation of urban political structures. And we want to take a look at the development of the different types of local government structures and the way local governments are designed and the reasoning behind this. So, there are a number of forms of local government. Most of them are on the basis of the relationship between the executive and legislative branches and then power over the execution of laws. And there are three primary types of local forms of government that we have that we'll take a look at: the commission form of government, the council-manager form of government, and the mayor-council. And then we'll take a look at some of the different ways in which councils are organized as well and some of the benefits behind them. So one way that governments are organized is through the idea of commissions. So basically, either at a district or a citywide level, people elect commissioners who serve basically as a city council. And in each one of these diagrams, you have the citizens at the top and then the other forms of government below. So in this system of a commission form of government, there oftentimes is not a focal mayor. Typically one person will be named as the mayor, one of the commissioners, but really it just means that they're first among equals, a person that kind of just convenes meetings and oversees the meetings, but they don't have any real power any more than any of the other commissioners do. So these commissioners and the way they're set up then kind of violates one of our fundamental principles of separation of powers in the United States, which is that we typically have an executive to carry things out and a legislature to be able to make the laws and ask for them to be executed. In this situation, what happens is each one of the commissioners is given authority over one aspect of government so that they can oversee that aspect of government, report back to the government, and be responsible for that. So, for example, I've got a couple of different, this is a basic structure of what commissioners might be responsible for. So, one commissioner might be involved with public works, roads, things like that. Another commissioner would be in charge of parks and recreation, another in charge of finance, police, or safety services, and then finally somebody would be involved with social services. And each one of those people would then oversee the employees that take care of those services and report back on how those things were functioning, and we could hold that person responsible when something goes wrong. Again, this is one of those situations, though, where there is no one single focal point of the government. There's no one person, rather it's the entire commission. The other thing that came into being, and this is really kind of as a consequence of the progressive movement that we've talked about, is the idea of a council manager. And this was very much in tune with what early public administration wanted to see have happen. And that was basically the idea that we would separate politics and the execution of public policy from each other. So let's take a look here at how that would work. Again, we have the citizens at the top, this being a democracy, and we elect members of the council. Those council members then go about deciding what types of public policies that they want for the city and make the laws, and then we have an appointed city manager who carries out those laws. Typically that appointed city manager would be somebody who has a public administration background, is skilled in the process of how to execute and implement policies, and that person would then do what the best practice was concerning that. So there's always kind of this discussion that there is no Republican or Democratic way to be able to pave a road. That's essentially what the city manager was all about. Let's use the best practice to make sure that we get the best type of road for the cheapest cost that's going to serve the needs of our citizens by having a trained person carry these things out. Now, in reality, what happens, particularly in smaller cities where you don't have full-time council members, which is most cities, is that the city manager plays a lot more role in politics than you would see otherwise. Council members are generally members of the public that might have an expertise in some area that's important to government, but they work part-time and they don't always know the best practices. So the city manager isn't completely divorced from politics. Rather, people on the council oftentimes go to the city manager to ask, how they should behave and what types of laws they should pass and want examples that would help them out. So the city manager gets involved in a lot more of the day-to-day politics than probably the original idea of a council manager form would have otherwise stated. And then probably the local form of government that we're more familiar with would be the mayor-council system of government, where you have the citizens independently electing a city council and then a mayor. This is a kind of our typical separation of powers operation that we see throughout the federal government and the state governments as well. Now, there are what's called a weak mayor and a strong mayor form of government. With the strong mayor form of government, the mayor has power over appointments, at least in consultation with council. The mayor is responsible for submitting a budget to the council. The mayor gets to oversee the city agencies and has the ability to be able to veto legislation from council. The weak form of mayor basically gives much more power to the city council, and the mayor is more of a figurehead as opposed to being a strong policy maker. Now, what about councils? How do we get them? Well, there are three basic ways that we get councils, and luckily we have Philadelphia very much nearby that provides kind of a mix of the two. The first is the idea of having district elections. So, for example, you take a look at this map of Philadelphia, and there are 10 districts there, and each one of those districts represents a certain set of neighborhoods or a certain population of the city. And as you can see, that's perfectly gerrymandered. Particularly if you take a look at the 7th and the 6th, or 7th and the 5th districts there are very much, very interesting characters. So your representative would then represent that neighborhood, that section of people. We also have the concept of having at-large elections, which instead of dividing the city up into 10 different districts, we would have, say, 5 people elected over the course of the entire city, and instead of representing those smaller neighborhoods, they'd represent the city as a whole. And then there are mixed systems, which is what the city of Philadelphia has. So the city of Philadelphia has 10 districts that are representing different neighborhoods, as you can see here. And then on the other hand, they have 7 at-large people that are elected throughout the city. So they represent the interests of the entire city, not just the city of the various just neighborhoods within the city. So Philadelphia is kind of a hybrid mix. There's 17 members, 10 are from districts, 7 are from at-large. Now, what's the pros and cons here? Well, as you might imagine, people that were into government reform, the progressives in the early 1900s, didn't like the district elections. They felt it worked too much to the advantage of the machine politics of the day. But what you see here is that it's particularly good for minorities and ethnic minorities and people that are concentrated in certain neighborhoods, because it gives them somebody who's their voice within city council. And that voice might not be heard in the form of an at-large elections. Again, taking a look here, you might have a little enclave of certain ethnicities that are in District 3, and there are not enough people to be able to make a voice citywide, but if they've got one representative, somebody's listening to them. Also makes people more sensitive and responsive to local issues. So if you're from a neighborhood that has a problem, you're much more willing to be able to deal with the problems of your constituents because they're the ones that elect you, right? That specific pothole in a certain part of your district needs to be fixed because everybody there is complaining about it. Now, citywide, that might not be the case. And also, one of the nice things here is that we've got, with the district system, one person is responsible for your area, and it's easier to get close to that person and to contact them as opposed to a city, say, for example, that would represent, if we elected everybody in Philadelphia in at-large districts, then that would be 1.5 million people, basically clamoring for each one of those representatives. The at-large election, basically, the reason why the reformers liked this so much was because it take into account not the needs of individual neighborhoods, but rather the needs of the entire city as a whole. And that was a very appealing aspect of what the reformers wanted. The other thing is, when we take a look at this, I may go along with something, say I'm in District 10, I may go along with something in District 2, not because I really cared about it or thought it was a great idea, but because I needed District 2 to go along with me to make sure that my priorities for my neighborhood were passed. And the reformers didn't think that this was necessarily a very good way to go about government. It's not about trying to get whatever you can, it's about doing what's best for the city. So that's the idea of log rolling. You vote for me, I'll vote for you. And the reformers thought that was a bad idea, and that's why they liked the at-large elections, because everybody represented the same exact people. And again, this was something that was very much an attempt to be able to get rid of machine politics. And if you also think about it, if you're electing people citywide as opposed from each one of these neighborhoods, you've got a more qualified pool of applicants, so to speak, to be able to run in the elections if somebody's doing it citywide rather than just in one of these individual districts. Now, finally, what are some of the ways that mayors have been able to succeed or fail as the focal point of governments? Well, first of all, they have to have staff and resources in order to be able to get their jobs done, right? The professionalization of city government is important for them to be able to achieve their objectives. Local government also has to have the ability to be able to control the things that are most important to their people. So, education is really big, and in a lot of local governments, there's a separately elected school board, but at the same time, people hold mayors accountable for the school system, even though they don't necessarily have the ability to be able to influence that. So the more power that we give to the local government to be able to carry out its functions, the more chance a mayor has to be successful because they can control those areas. Full-time salary, having a full-time mayor is very important for success of the mayor and for staff. Having a media market big enough to be able to get the message of the mayor out on television and newspapers is very important as well, so that people understand what the government's trying to do and the message of the mayor gets out. And then finally, if you have strong political parties that can mobilize support on behalf of the mayor's agenda, that's also a very important aspect of that. So those are some key things about the ways that the structures of local governments differ from each other, and each area has has its own political culture that supports one or the other of these various things.